There's going to be a lot of me chatting in this CPD, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you, because we really do. So Greg, my colleague, is going to be in the chat box. He's going to be sharing links with you in the chat box. He's going to be sharing the PowerPoint presentation, the slide presentation, if you want to follow along with it where you are. And he's also there for comments. So if you've got anything you want to say, any questions you want to ask, we've got some dedicated time at the end, but please feel free to interact with Greg in the chat box as well. And he'll bring anything to my attention that he thinks is urgent. So let's get stuck into it then, folks. So a bit of a quick background, if you don't know who we are and this is the first time you're joining us. So Smart School Councils is a teacher-led charity that was founded in 2016 by Greg, who has a background in policy with the DFE, and by our colleague Asha, who is a youth worker. I joined in 2017, fresh from the classroom, and our mission is to help every child lead change through pupil voice and democracy. How do we do this? Well, we've got a core program that has 3 elements to it, which radicalizes in an easy way, I think, how pupil voice works in school settings. We've got about 360 member schools, and those come across the full spectrum of the different types of schools you'd find: primaries, secondaries, PRUs, SEN schools, AP schools, and international schools as well. And you'll see some of the organizations we work with along the bottom just there as well. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to allow for a system in which young people lead change and use their voice through school councils and through democracies, and that this aim includes everyone. We know that traditional school councils have their place, but they tend to involve only a small number of students, often small students who have got better and greater capacity than you would normally have. And sometimes they can, as a consequence of that, exclude some more of the marginalized voices. So our organization exists to make sure that everybody is involved. So let's get on to the subject of today's CPD then, after a little bit of an intro to who we are. This is the central question that we're asking. Why is it hard to get staff involved in pupil voice or in school council? And presumably that's a frustration that you have, and that's why you're here on today's CPD. And what we're going to try and do is spend a little bit of time focusing on what this question is, and maybe some of the frustrations we might have as coordinators for pupil voice or school council in our settings, but also try and be really practical and share with you what we do to try and overcome these barriers, and some resources are going to help you do that. Can I just remind you again, please, folks, if you could have your microphones on mute, that would be really, really appreciated. So I'm sure if you would mind sending a comment to Greg, maybe tell him what your experience is, or maybe some of your frustrations in answering this question. But for us, there are 3, I guess, barriers that we've come across in our experience that fall under the category of it's hard to get people involved in pupil voice. And these are the common barriers that we see. So one is that there's a lack of support and buy-in from SLT. If there are any members of SLT here, and we're not trying to bag you necessarily, but that is something that our teachers say to us is a frustration sometimes. The other barrier is that pupil voice or school council has a low profile. And because it has a low profile in school, it maybe has low priority with staff with teaching or responsibilities with pupils themselves. And then the third barrier that we often see is that even if the first 2 things aren't a problem, that sometimes it's really hard to get teachers or adults in the classroom to pass on the opportunities for pupil voice to the pupils in their classes. And sometimes we can be in a school in which all 3 of these things are happening simultaneously, and that's going to be a real challenge. But I know that there are probably more. I'm sure that you're sitting there thinking, oh, I can think of a few other barriers to getting adults involved in pupil voice and school council in my school. And we're not saying that this is a comprehensive list. I think these are the ones that are the key in terms of what we get from feedback from our member schools. And also when I was a teacher myself, and these are the sorts of experiences that I had in school. So what we're going to try and do together is take each one of these barriers, explore them a little bit, and then try and provide some tips for how to overcome them. Some of them will have multiple tips, some of them will have 1 or 2, but that's what our aim is going to be. And then when we've discussed how it is as a charity we approach overcoming these barriers, we'll share a resource with you as well. Now, I'm very conscious of the fact that there are going to be some people on this CPD who are members of our program and are coming in to get some additional help. There are also others of you who maybe are just learning about us for the first time, or considering whether you want to join one of our cohorts. And so I'm going to try, and I think we'll do this quite well, offer some solutions to these barriers for both you as member schools and you who are not member schools. So hopefully that sounds okay, and hopefully that sounds good to you, and let's get stuck into it. So we'll take our first barrier, a lack of support and buy-in from SLT or from senior leadership in school. So what's our first tip? Well, one of the first tips, and this will be really persuasive for some heads and maybe less so for others, but this is our first tip, which is reminding us all of our responsibilities for pupil voice in terms of the curriculum and also the inspection framework. And saying that hopefully and I'm very confident about this, what our program, if you become a member, provides is a meaningful and structured and evidenced way of meeting Ofsted requirements, being able to explore and to provide insight into how you're meeting British values, the fundamental British values around democracy and areas of the prevent agenda. And that I guess that through the wider use of the three elements of our program, how SMSC is being done in a genuinely pupil-led way. Now, I know that Ofsted can be a bit of a stick that, you know, the sector will beat ourselves with a little bit, and it isn't going to be something that should be, I guess, always at the top of our priority list, but it is something that's phenomenally important. And so that's our first tip. Our program and having a robust pupil voice structure will allow you to evidence these things when people ask questions. And from what we've seen over pre-lockdown anyway, is that sort of pupil voice is taking on an increasingly important role for Ofsted when they look at schools and they look to try and assess their various merits. And young people being consciously aware of how their voice is having an effect on their school community is a really compelling evidence. So that's our first thing that we would suggest to try and secure that buy-in from SLT, is to try and take this kind of inspection and curriculum approach. The second, this is a bit more about the vision, and that's why I've underlined it. This is the sort of thing that you would, before I heard about Smart School Council, before I joined, really spoke to me when I first met Greg and Asher, which was the vision of the program, or pupil voice rather, being about every child having a say and every young person being able to experience and benefit from democracy and social action. Like, that should be, for most of us in the profession, a huge draw to change. And I guess the questions that we might ask ourselves as schools is, well, how well are we currently doing this? At the moment, does every child in our school benefit from an experienced democracy? If we're doing a traditional school council, it would be hard, I think, to say yes to that question. And if we aren't including everybody, like, who are we leaving out? And is that okay? Are we okay with that as practitioners? And if we answer the question, it's probably going to be, we're leaving out the more vulnerable, the quieter, the ones that maybe we don't need to focus as much attention on because their needs are less demanding. Because that's who they are, should that mean that they miss out? And that if we aren't happy with that, if the status quo isn't working for us and it doesn't include everybody, then change does require effort. And change does mean we need to do something differently and we need to try something new. But hopefully that's going to come with a huge amount of reward. So that's our sort of second approach, I think, for securing buy-in from SLT. And then the third then is all about managing workloads, isn't it? And about, I guess, what can happen a lot in schools is a sort of a turnover of lots of different interventions that happen termly, and people get sort of quite, can quite easily get sort of dispassionate about them. This is going to be easy to do. If we want to include everybody, if we want to be able to evidence how pupil voice works in our institution, we found a way that's going to be easy. And we've got a structure that comes in three elements. If you don't know much about it, they're called class meetings, the communication team and action teams, that will allow you to meet those first two aims in a way in which you aren't experiencing a huge amount of overhaul and additional workload. So those are the three sort of, when I talk to SLT and I talk to school leaders, this is the sort of things that we might say and about how we want to get them passionate about the impact that a program like this can have. So what can we do to help you to do that if that's something you want to do? Well, as some of you will know this already, our resources that we offer free online introductions to our program, where we talk about all of those three things and we explore what they look like. There's one of them tomorrow. Greg, if you'd be so kind, if you could post a link in the comment box with our sort of dates for the rest of the academic term, that'd be brilliant. We've got one tomorrow at 11:30 where, again, Greg and I are meeting a bunch of new schools and talking to them all about what we're up to. So persuade people, or I guess that's the term, isn't it? Advise people to come along and find out more about it. Because the onus doesn't have to be on you necessarily as a staff member. We want to help share that load with you and do some of that work as well. So yeah, we've got one on tomorrow at 11:30. We've got some on next week. You should see the link in the comment box. So have a look and maybe decide if you want to share that with your staff, and then they can come along. So that's our first one. Please, if you've got any questions about that, or you've got anything you want to say, pop it in the comment box, and then Greg will bring it in to us. If you feel like that's a comprehensive answer to the first barrier, then fantastic. Just let me know. It'd be good to hear from you. But in the meantime, let's take our second point, or our second barrier. So our second barrier, as we discussed earlier on, was that sometimes school council and pupil voice, and I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably, I guess, have a low profile and priority amongst teaching staff. And if that's the case, what can we do about it? Okay, our first tip. So our first tip is a bit about understanding what we're trying to achieve. I guess it's the question of, well, what's the point of a school council? Are we doing it very well? I guess this links quite similarly to what we were just saying about SLT, but it's about making sure that that message of what we're trying to achieve and why we're doing it is communicated to all of our staff, not just those with sort of leadership responsibilities. And this, again, can be about the world in which we may inadvertently be leaving some voices behind. What are we teaching as a consequence of that? What does that mean? Is the point of a school council that we get a platform for pupil voice? Well, yes, it is. Okay, well, how well are we doing that? Is the point of a school council to sit in a room with a small number of students who are hugely high achievers and have a nice time? Well, no, it's not. But that might be what's currently happening. And that's one of the messages we want to get across to our teaching staff, to secure the concept. That's not going to work for everybody, but I think it works for most teachers, because the vast majority of people don't go into teaching to leave people behind, or to leave people out, or to let young people down. And so if we're communicating that to them, that's going to be a big part of securing a higher priority. There are others, of course. Our second one is to make sure that they understand what they're doing and that they can get involved. I'm sure that there's some hesitation there when I say you can get involved, because genuinely, when you go to teachers, I remember this in my classroom, and say, hey, can you do this? The answer often is, I'm too busy, I can't cope. But I think that involving people and making them feel a part of something is what will contribute to a consistent approach to securing buy-in. And briefing them and making sure that they understand what that means is a big part of that. And we're going to talk in a little while about a resource that we as an organization, as a charity, offer to help you to do it. And then the third thing is we need to make it easy to understand, and we need to make it visible. That's one of the most important parts. If we aren't making what's going on in our school with pupil voice as visible and easy to access as possible, then we're not making it easy for our teachers, and I guess it's harder for it to cut through the noise. So we don't want them to think it's a job. We want them to think that it's something they can get involved in, and we want to make it visible so that they can see it's a vibrant part of the culture of our school, and not just something that is an obligation that you have to do. So those are our tips. How do we do that? Okay, well, you may have seen this before if you've come along to some of our other CPD, but one of the ways we do this is through a progress board. So if you're a non-member school at the moment, you're not one of our members, then this is something you can very easily be implemented, and we'll pop a link in the chat for you now to get access to some examples of what they look like and maybe some resources to help you to do it. The purpose of a progress board is just to make sure that what is happening in your school, whether that's campaigns, whether it's clubs and activities, whether it's a particular drive that you've got going on, are understood by everybody in school, and that the progress is understood, that who's responsible and the accountability is understood, and that and if you've probably heard me talk about this before, you'll know that my favorite part of the progress board is the making sure that the ideas that have been suggested to us through pupil-voice don't get dismissed, that there's never a closed loop of feedback where a pupil, for whatever reason, has an idea, it's suggested through the route that you have, and then they never hear anything about it because somebody else has made the decision that it can't work. So that's the bottom section, things we can't do and why, I think, to me is fundamentally important. Now, raising the profile of school council for member schools is also something Greg and I can do because as an organisation, we offer specific online introduction and training to our member schools to, if you want it to be live, as many people as in the school as you can to come and join us for an online meeting, or even recorded 15-minute briefings that you can then share with your staff that gives a full introduction to how the program is going to work and how they can get involved. That's a really core part of it, is making sure that it isn't just abstract, it's practical, and they know exactly what to do to get involved. So I know I've kind of cheated a little bit by giving 2 resources to this one, but I wanted to make sure that we're both helping those of you on the call who aren't member schools and those of you who are. If you are a member school and you think that your staff would benefit from training from Greg and I, then please reach out to us. In fact, I'm not sure if I put the link in, Greg, but if you wouldn't mind popping a link to booking that would be brilliant. So maybe I've asked you to do that already, but thank you if you have. So that's our second challenge, a low profile and priority among staff. Let's move on to our third challenge, and we're doing well for timing so far. Okay, so teachers not getting their classes involved. I think there's a bit of a scale to what we're looking at here. It's kind of the hierarchy, I guess, in some sense in school. It's how do we get the top of the school chain involved? How do we get everybody aware of what's happening? And then we come down then to the individual staff members who may not be giving their classes all of the opportunities they should. Right. There are a couple of things for this. One of them is the stick, one of them is the carrot, and then there's an additional one. And I amused myself earlier by putting pictures of stick and carrots in there. And it's up to you guys to decide which kind of approach you think will be more effective. But the stick approach, I guess, is, right, well, if I as a class teacher or as a staff member in the classroom, am not prioritizing this, what are the consequences? And the consequences might be that pupils are missing out. They aren't learning the non-cognitive skills or the non-academic skills that would normally get discussed through things like pupil voice and school council, oracy, debate, compromise, argumentation, all of those sorts of skills that are fundamentally important to unlocking success in life aren't being given the platform they should. They may be happening in other ways, but this is a core way in which they should be happening in schools. And if we aren't prioritizing, if we aren't getting our class involved, this is what happens. And then the other thing for us, which I guess will appeal to some teachers but not all, is this idea that we are really passionate about the idea that schools have a role to play in preparing young people to become active citizens when they graduate into adult life. And by active citizens, we mean people who want to engage in democracy, who want to not just vote in elections, but take an active role in their communities, whether that's for change, whether that's for societal movements, whether that's for just celebrating things, whatever it might be. That's fundamental to what we're trying to do. And by not prioritizing in class, we aren't building young people who are prepared for active citizenship. Anyway, that's the stick. I'll stop preaching, but there it is. The second thing is the carrot. Okay, well, if we want to make sure that we're sort of being a bit softer in our language, then we can say, okay, well, how can we make this easy for you? If we want to, if you're not currently getting your class involved, what can we do to help you to do that? We want to make sure that you don't have to prepare anything to do it. We want to make sure you don't have to plan anything to do it. Absolutely. We don't want there to be any extra work. We want this to be something that is going to be easy and maybe even saves time for you to get involved in. And then sometimes, and this is something our member schools do quite a lot of, and it's a really fantastic tip. If for whatever reason they have a repeat offender, so like I say it in quite dramatic terms, but you know what I mean, a class that isn't doing class meetings or isn't getting their classes involved in pupil voice, they'll send pupils down, leadership responsibility pupils, for us pupils who are on the communications team, to remind them and say, hey, I noticed you didn't run your class meeting last week. Is there a reason for that? Can I help you to do it next week? Can I come down to your class when you're running it and run it for you? It's a really good tip for helping adults to access it, and maybe sometimes making them feel a bit guilty about the fact that they haven't. So that's our carrot approach. And then the third part is that, for me at least anyway, when I was in school, one of the major barriers to teachers doing most things was because they weren't sure how to do it. And so we need to, as coordinators, as leads of pupil voice in our institutions, make sure that we are demonstrating what it is and how it needs to be done. Now, for us, the resource to achieve all of these things is our class meeting tool. And if you've heard about this before, you won't be surprised to hear me talk about it. If you don't know what it is, it's our digital tool that allows for the communications team, part of our program, the leadership team, to create a question with different responses and sort of send it out in the form of a link to class teachers for every class in school to get involved in a 10 or 15-minute meeting. The link gets clicked through an email, it appears on your screen, it takes over the whiteboard, and then as a staff member, all you need to do is hand over to two young people from the class who are going to lead the rest of you through that 10 or 15-minute meeting. It is easy, and it's also fantastically enjoyable, and it gives a genuine and tangible sense of what's happening and how to get involved. So our class meeting tool, that is our resource to make sure that we're getting teachers involved in making sure their classes are getting involved and making it easy and fun to do so. Right, I've whizzed through that in sort of, what was it, 35 minutes, which I expected me to do. Normally I go on for ages, so you're welcome. But I guess I wanted to just spend a bit of time sort of thinking about our tips and maybe talking about some of the experiences that you have. So maybe think to yourself for a second, like, what is your experience of trying to get adults involved? And are there any questions or any experiences you have that you feel like aren't covered by what we've spoken about? Because we'd like to respond to that in the time that we have. And if it's something that Greg and I can't respond to, then maybe we can open it up to other people on the call to speak to as well. So Greg, I'll come to you first, if that's okay. Anything in the chat box that people have said that we should respond to before I open up to other people, just to maybe tell us a bit about their thoughts?
It has been fairly quiet in the chat box today, Sam, but but we have had some questions about whether the staff training is included in does that cost extra? But yeah, thanks for that question, Machine. That's included all in the membership. We'd like to kind of make it nice and simple for you. And Kat had a really good point, which is about, in the new world of bubbles, I think that school councils could be a great way of keeping the school together. Less of a question, but I think a really good point. Yeah, so no questions that you haven't already covered, Sam.
Cool. I might just build on Kat's point there for a second, because I think it's a really important one. Because we're not yet, and we may not be in September, in a position where school looks like normal in the sort of, so to speak. And one of the things we're going to find is that the school population is going to be in their diaspora of sorts, isn't it? They're going to be sections of the school that will be able to integrate, and there will be sections that will see each other regularly. But getting everybody together in one space is going to be hugely unlikely. And that collective sense of community is something that's going to be difficult. And I couldn't agree with Kat more. We've had conversations with some of our member schools about how the class meetings, because they're being sent out to every class in the school, but don't require every class in the school to be together in the same place at the same time, are a way in which there can be a consistent message or a consistent sense that we're a part of something bigger than our year group, our bubble, or whatever it might be, depending upon what setting you're on in the future. So there's that side of what September's going to look like, I think, that we should talk about as a potential. So I think that's really important. And I guess the other thing for September isn't just how we use the class meeting tool, but it's the type of questions that we ask. And we think about how we're asking questions that is of a subject that's a common experience for all of our pupils. So I think that's really important, and that's a really good point. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions in the chat box right now, I guess what I would ask for you is if you've got any comments or anything you want to say. I appreciate those of you who've put your cameras on so I can see your smiling faces. But yeah, anything you want to ask at this point, folks? Any comments you've got about the CPD? Anything you want to add in that you think might be a useful thought? If so, do so now. Otherwise, we will maybe end a little bit early. So let me just have a quick look to see all of your great faces and see if anybody wants to say anything. Okay, guys. Well, it looks like we're all good. Can you give me some thumbs up if we've had a useful half an hour? Cool. Thanks very much, guys. Well, I'm nice to see the thumbs. The thumbs are really good. Thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate those. So very quickly then, before we finish, I know some of you are in the process of becoming members, some of you aren't, some of you are already. It's always important for us to talk about our support network and how we can support you as teachers. So there's our email, which Greg and I and our team will respond to whenever we can. But very quickly. We've got our members Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, it's a great way to access a community of teachers who are all trying to achieve the same thing. We've got every Thursday at 3:30, or every other Thursday. So we've got our CPD today. This time next week, Greg and I will be on Facebook Live, chatting about our membership and maybe host. I think this week we're spotlighting a teacher who has experience of running a Smart School Council and is going to talk about their journey. And what we're also going to talk about is some of the CPD opportunities we've got coming up. Greg, if you pop in the chat box a link to our Twitter. We're pretty active on Twitter. And the ed tech sector, the education sector in general, is very good at being on social media, and we try to encourage people to engage with us there as well. And then very finally, if you've not heard of it already, we are always talking about, and we make no apologies for, Home Debate Club. Home Debate Club is our lockdown, I guess, initiative that we've run over the last, was it now, Greg, 10, 11 weeks, and we will be continuing over the summer. It is a completely free to access resource for helping young people at home to contextualize the world around them through debate and through democracy. It's their way of having a say on the pandemic and being supported, or us supporting them and their families to have constructive well-being conversations. We've made this decision recently that we're going to keep going live every Wednesday morning at 10:30 across the summer. We're really excited to do that. Maybe we'll get some guest hosts in at some point so Greg and I can take a holiday. Those will be really exciting, I'm sure. But what we're looking for at the moment is for the school community to help us to reach young people. The major way that we reach young people to get involved in this free initiative at the moment is by reaching out to our 300+ member school and saying, okay, can you share with your school communities what we're up to? Now, that's not going to happen over the summer. and quite rightly, because teachers should not be setting work or going on to Google Classroom or whatever it might be across the summer. So we're trying to get parents themselves to visit homedebateclub.com, sign up on our website so they can receive email reminders that tell them when we're going live on every Wednesday and what the subject's going to be about, and the additional warm-up activities and missions that we set students around the debates each week. So visit homedebateclub.com or reach out to Greg and I if you feel like you'd like to do that with your student population, because we're looking to get as many people involved as we can. Kat, I can see you've got a quick question. I can answer it now. Our session about involving the more marginalised young people and including the quietest voices is 2 weeks today. So what date is that? That is the 16th. So 16th of July at 3:30 is when we are doing that CPD, and we'd encourage you to come along to that as well. So that's it from Greg and I. If anybody, unless we've got any questions, I just don't think we have. So it's just from us to say thank you for your time. It's great to see some familiar faces coming back from our What is a Smart School Council CPD the other day. And I'd encourage you to reach out to us and have a chat about what your plans are for September. And it would be really great to hear about that. So thanks again, guys. Brilliant to see you again. And thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Thanks very much. Cheers, everyone. Bye. Bye. It's just you and I, Mr. Greg.